The cell was cold. It was always cold. The walls were made of a dark gray metal that hummed low and steady, like something deep inside the station was always breathing. The floor had no mat, no bed, no comfort of any kind. There was a single light strip above the door that never turned off. It glowed a pale blue color, and it made everything in the small room look like the inside of a freezer. Siravas did not mind the cold. She was hanging from a thick cooling pipe that ran along the top of the cell wall, pulling herself up with both arms, slow and controlled, the same way she had done it 500 times before. Her hands were rough. Her knuckles were scarred from years of training and fighting and surviving things that most people never came close to. She was not a large woman. She was not tall, but every muscle in her body had a purpose, and every scar on her skin had a story. She had been a United Earth Marine for 11 years. She had served on 4 different combat tours. She had been shot, broken, burned, and left for dead on 2 separate occasions. She had always come back. She counted her pulls quietly in her head and kept her breathing even. Outside the cell, on the other side of the thick door, she could hear the sounds of the station. Heavy boots on metal floors. Strange voices talking in a language she did not understand yet, though she was already starting to recognize patterns in it. The sound of machinery. The hiss of vents. The distant hum of engines so large that their vibration moved through the walls and into her bones. She had been captured 6 days ago. Her mission had been simple. A deep recon run near the outer veil, the far edge of mapped space, where Earth's long-range sensors had picked up energy signatures that did not match anything in the database. She had gone with a small team. They had found the source of the signal, and then everything had gone wrong very fast. The others had not made it. Sierra had woken up in this cell with her gear gone, her communicator gone, and a dull ache behind her eyes that told her something had been used on her. A sedative, probably. She had figured that out quickly because when the alien workers pushed a small container of food through the slot in the door, there was a faint smell to it that was almost sweet. Too sweet. She had eaten it anyway. All of it. Nothing had happened. She had kept eating every meal they gave her. Whatever they were putting in the food, it was not working. She suspected they had no idea how human biology actually functioned. That was fine with her. She dropped from the pipe and landed quietly on the floor. She rolled her shoulders and took a slow breath. Species that had taken her were called the Vathkari. She had never heard of them before. No one on Earth had. They were tall, around 7 feet most of them, with pale gray skin that looked almost like stone under the blue light. They had 4 arms, 2 long and 2 short, and their eyes were a deep amber color with pupils that split sideways. They moved with a kind of stiff, careful precision, like every action had been rehearsed. Their armor was heavy and dark, and covered in symbols she could not read. They were powerful. She had seen enough in her first hours of capture to understand that. The weapons they carried were not like anything she had seen before. The station itself was massive, far beyond anything humanity had built. These were not a primitive species. They had been traveling the stars for a very long time. And yet, the way they looked at her through the cell door window told her everything she needed to know about how they saw her. They looked the way people look at something small and confused that wandered into the wrong place, like she was a stray animal, something weak and out of its depth. She found that very useful. On the 3rd day, a group of them had come into the cell. Scientists, she guessed, based on the tools they carried. They had run instruments over her body without speaking to her. They had pressed devices against her skin, taken a small amount of blood, shone lights into her eyes. They had argued with each other in their clipped, angular language, pointing at their readings with what she read clearly as confusion and frustration. One of them had touched her arm and applied a small amount of pressure, the way you might test the firmness of fruit. She had looked at him. He had stepped back. After they left, she had heard them talking loudly in the corridor for a long time. Whatever their instruments had shown them, it was not what they expected. She knew why. Human beings were strange creatures by almost any measure. They were not the fastest species. They were not the strongest. They did not have natural armor or venom or the ability to survive in vacuum. On paper, they were soft and slow and fragile compared to dozens of species that evolution had shaped for raw survival. But human beings had lived through ice ages and plagues and wars that had nearly wiped them out over and over again. They had bodies that adapted under pressure, that grew stronger from damage, that flooded with chemicals during crisis that let them do things that should not have been physically possible. They were endurance animals. They were persistence hunters. They had not clawed their way to the top of their own world by being the biggest thing in the room. They had done it by being the last thing still standing. The instruments the Vathkari scientists had used were calibrated for species they already understood. Species with simpler systems, more predictable chemistry, bodies that behaved the way bodies were supposed to behave. Sierra's readings had not matched any of that. Her bone density alone had probably broken 2 of their machines. Her adrenaline output under stress was something their charts likely had no category for. That was not a problem she intended to fix for them. On the 6th day, a tall Vathkari in heavier armor than the others came to stand at her cell door. He looked at her for a long time. He had a stillness to him that the others did not, the stillness of someone who was used to making decisions and watching other people deal with the consequences. She stood in the center of the cell and looked back at him without blinking. He said something to the guard beside him. The guard wrote it down. Then the tall one turned and walked away. That night the lights outside her cell were busier than usual. She could hear more voices, more movement. She pressed her back against the wall and listened, pulling apart every sound she could identify, filing it away. She did not know what they had decided. She did not know what was coming next. But she ate every bite of her dinner, cold and strange as it was, and she did her last set of push-ups before she allowed herself to sleep, and she slept deeply and without fear, because fear was not a thing she had space for right now. There was too much work to do. They came for her in the morning. She knew it was morning only because the activity outside her cell had a rhythm to it, and she had learned that rhythm over the past 6 days the way she had learned everything else, by paying attention and saying nothing. More guards in the early hours, quieter in the middle stretch, busy again toward what she assumed was the end of a shift cycle. There were 4 of them at her door this time. 2 carried the long-handled weapon she had seen before, a kind of pulse staff that crackled faintly at the tip when the guards were nervous. The other 2 had restraint cuffs, thick loops of heavy metal connected by a short chain. They entered the cell without speaking and moved toward her with the confidence of people who had done this many times before. She put her wrists out for them. That seemed to confuse them. She could tell by the small pause, the sideways glance between the 2 with the cuffs. They had probably expected resistance. Maybe they had been briefed to expect it, given what their instruments had shown them. Instead, she stood still and made it easy, and that unsettled them more than a fight would have. The cuffs went on. They were tight and heavy, and she noted the locking mechanism on the left one without looking directly at it. They walked her out of the cell and down a long corridor. The station was even larger than she had imagined from inside her small room. The hallways were wide enough for 3 of the Vathkari to walk side by side, and the ceiling was high, built for their height and then some. The walls were that same dark metal, covered in markings and displays she could not read. The air smelled like something metallic and faintly chemical, not unpleasant, just alien. Other Vathkari moved through the halls. Most of them glanced at her as she passed. A few stopped to stare. She walked at an even pace, kept her eyes forward, and filed away every detail she could. Turns in the corridor, door types, guard positions. The way sound traveled. The location of what looked like ventilation access panels near the floor. They took her down 2 levels on a platform that dropped smoothly and silently, then through a set of doors that were thicker than any she had seen so far. The sound changed on the other side. It opened up. The echo was different, wider, deeper, the kind of echo that told her she was entering a very large space. She was right. The arena was enormous. It was circular, with walls that rose at least 40 feet on all sides. The floor was flat and covered in a pale, gritty material that was not quite sand but served the same purpose. It absorbed impact and soaked up whatever needed to be soaked up. The walls were lined with rows upon rows of seats, and those seats were full. Thousands of Vathkari, packed into tiered sections that rose toward the high curved ceiling. The noise was a wall of sound, layered and strange, clicks and low tones mixed with sharper calls that rose and fell like waves. Sierra stood at the edge of the entrance tunnel and looked at all of it without expression. A guard gave her a shove from behind, not hard, just directing. She walked out onto the floor. The reaction from the crowd was immediate. The noise shifted, became something lighter, almost amused. She could feel it even without understanding the words. They were laughing, not all of them, but enough. She was small by their standards. She was unarmed. She wore the same plain gray clothing she had woken up in. She had no armor, no weapon, no visible reason to be taken seriously. Good, she thought. In a high box above the far side of the arena, she could see the one she had started thinking of as the warden. He was the tall Vathkari who had stood at her cell door the night before. He was seated now, surrounded by others who had the same heavy, decorated look of authority. He was watching her with that same flat stillness. She looked at him for a moment, then looked away. A deep sound rolled through the arena, a horn or something like one, and the crowd noise dropped. A second set of doors on the far side of the floor, much larger than the one she had come through, began to open. She turned to face them. What came out was large. Even by Vathkari standards, it was large. It moved on 4 legs with a 5th limb folded against its back, and its body was covered in overlapping scales of a dark greenish-brown that looked like armor plating. Its head was broad and low, with a wide jaw and eyes set far apart, small and deeply focused. Its arms, the upper 2, were long and heavily muscled, each ending in a hand with thick curved fingers that dragged shallow lines in the sand as it walked. This was a Krethsalyun. She did not know its name then, but she learned it later. The Vathkari used them as executioners. They were bred and trained for the arena from birth. They had ended the lives of creatures far larger and far more fearsome-looking than one small human woman, and every being in the seats above knew it. The crowd came alive again, loud and sharp, full of anticipation. The creature stopped near the center of the floor and turned its small eyes toward her. It read her the way predators read prey, measuring distance, sizing up speed, calculating threat. Then something shifted in its posture, a loosening. The calculation had come back simple. She watched it settle into that confidence and noted it carefully. She knew what the creature saw. She knew what everyone in this arena saw. She had spent her whole career making sure that what people saw when they looked at her was exactly what she needed them to see. Right now, she needed them to see something small and lost and easy. The horn sounded again. The Krethsalyun moved. It was fast for its size. It crossed half the floor in a time that she respected, and it came at her with one massive arm swinging wide, meant to knock her off her feet and end the whole thing quickly. She dropped under it, felt the air move above her head, and drove her elbow hard into the joint where the arm connected to the shoulder as it passed. Not enough to break it, just enough to let it know she was there. The creature turned, surprised. The crowd noise changed pitch. What followed was not clean or simple or pretty. It was 12 minutes of the hardest physical work she had done in years. The creature was strong in ways that pushed against the edges of what she could manage. It hit her twice solidly, once in the ribs and once across her left shoulder, and both times she let the force of it carry her rather than fight it, rolling with it, coming back up, circling, looking for the next opening. She used every tool she had, joint pressure on limbs that bent in directions she could exploit, staying inside its reach where the long arms lost their power, using the sand, her footing, the geometry of the space. She was patient. She let the creature burn through its energy, chasing something it could not quite catch and could not quite understand. 12 minutes. When the Kreth finally went down, it did not go down because she had overpowered it. It went down because she had lasted longer than it could. Its breath was coming in great heavy pulls. Its movements had slowed and grown sloppy. She put it down with a precise application of force to the back of the joint behind its left front knee, and it dropped hard and did not get up. She stood over it, her ribs ached, her shoulder burned, her breathing was elevated but controlled. She looked up at the thousands of seats surrounding her. The arena was completely silent. Not quiet, silent. The kind of silence that falls when something happens that a crowd has no category for, when what they just watched does not fit into any box they had prepared. It stretched out for a long moment, 5 seconds, 10, long enough that the silence itself became a sound. She looked up at the warden's box. He was leaning forward slightly in his seat. The stillness was gone. His amber eyes were fixed on her, and in them, for the first time, she saw something that had not been there before. She turned away from him and walked back toward the tunnel without waiting for anyone to tell her to. Behind her, the silence held. The week after the fight was different. Not in any way that was obvious at first. The cell was still cold. The light strip still glowed pale blue. The food still came through the slot in the door at the same times, but the energy outside the cell had changed. She could feel it in the way the guards moved, quicker and less casual than before. She could hear it in the conversations that passed by her door, shorter and more clipped, like people who were worried about being overheard. She could see it in the way even the bravest of the Vathkari workers now avoided, looking through the small window of her cell door when they passed. Something had shifted. She kept her routine, pull-ups in the morning, push-ups in the evening, slow walks across the width of her cell to keep her legs from stiffening. She ate everything they gave her. She slept when she needed to. She stayed sharp. On the 4th day after the fight, 2 scientists came back. They were different ones this time, younger she guessed, and they stood outside the cell door rather than coming inside. They ran their instruments through the small window opening and spoke to each other in low voices. One of them kept looking at her hands. She held them up and turned them slowly, like she was showing them something interesting. They left quickly. On the 7th day, the guards came again. There were 6 of them this time. 6, for one unarmed human woman in a cold cell. She counted them without changing her expression and let them put the cuffs on and walked with them the same way she had walked before, steady and quiet and paying attention to everything. The route was the same, down the long corridor, 2 levels down on the platform, through the thick doors. But when she came out into the arena this time, the sound hit her like a wall. The seats were full again, but there were more of them now. Additional sections had been opened along the upper level that had been empty before. Every place was taken. The noise was different too, louder but also tighter, wound up, like a crowd that had been talking about this moment for days and was finally here for it. Word had spread. She stood at the edge of the tunnel entrance and looked out across the floor. The sand was fresh, raked clean. The walls were the same. The high box where the warden sat was full of more decorated figures than before, other high-ranking Vathkari who had come to see this for themselves. She looked at the floor and noted something new. There were markings on the sand, a wide circle drawn in a dark color near the center of the space. She had not seen that before. It told her this match had a different format. Something was going to happen at that circle. She walked out. The crowd noise did not shift into laughter this time. It stayed at that high, wound-up level, full of something she could only describe as nervous energy. They had seen what she did to the Kreth. They did not think she was a stray animal anymore. But they also did not know what to do with her yet, and that uncertainty was loud in its own way. The far doors did not open. Instead, a single figure walked out from a side entrance she had not noticed before. He was Vathkari, but different from the guards and workers and scientists. He was lean, with armor that was lighter and more fitted than the standard issue, designed for movement rather than protection. He had decorations across his chest and shoulders, markings that she read as rank and history even without knowing the language. In his right upper hand he carried a weapon she had not seen before. It was coiled like a whip, but the material was not leather or cord. It was a deep metallic color that shifted slightly as he moved, and at the tip there was a faint glow, a pale blue-white that pulsed slowly. She could feel something coming off it even at this distance, not heat exactly, more like pressure, a low, steady push against the air between them. She kept her face neutral and studied the weapon carefully. The figure walked to the center of the circle and stopped. He raised the weapon above his head with one arm, and the crowd responded with a sound that was clearly recognition and praise. This was someone they knew, someone they respected. He turned in a slow circle, acknowledging the sections of the crowd, and then he turned to face her. A Vathkari voice came from somewhere above, loud and carrying, announcing something she could not understand. But she did not need to understand the words. The crowd's response told her the shape of it. This was an introduction. This man was a champion, and the weapon he was holding was the point. She had seen enough. She walked to her side of the marked circle and stopped at its edge. She shook out her hands slowly, rolled her neck, and settled her weight low and even across both feet. Old habits, things her body knew before her mind finished the thought. The champion performed a ritual with the weapon, spinning it once in a long arc so that the coiled length of it spread out and then snapped back. When it moved, it left a faint trail of light in the air. The crowd sound rose. Then he charged the weapon. She watched him do it. Both long arms gripped the handle. His posture changed, back straight, feet set. She could see the energy building in the coil, the pale glow at the tip intensifying to something almost white, bright enough to cast short shadows on the sand. The pressure she had felt from across the floor grew stronger, pushing against her like a wind that wasn't there. The arena held its breath. She lowered her center of gravity by half a step and brought her right hand up slowly, palm forward, fingers loose. He fired. The blast came off the weapon as a tight coiled arc of energy, the whole length of the whip releasing at once in a concentrated forward pulse. It moved fast, not as fast as light but fast enough that any ordinary reaction time would have been too slow. It tore through the air and left a line of scorched brightness behind it, and it hit the space where she was standing with enough force to crack stone. She was not standing flat anymore. She had read the buildup in his posture, in the weapon, in the quality of the light and the push of the pressure field. In the last fraction of a second, she had shifted her weight, dropped her shoulder, and brought her right hand across in a tight, controlled arc, catching the outer tail of the coiled blast where its energy was densest, wrapping her fingers around it the way you wrap your hand around something spinning, and let the momentum carry rather than fight it. The force hit her palm like something enormous and angry. She redirected it down. The blast drove into the arena floor at an angle. The sand exploded outward from the impact point. The stone beneath cracked in a wide, jagged line. The shockwave rolled out in all directions, and she felt it move through her legs and up into her chest. Her right hand was on fire. She could smell her own skin burning. Her shoulder screamed at her. She did not move her feet. She stood in the settling dust with her arms still extended, her palms still forward, and she looked at the champion across the circle. He had stumbled backward from the recoil of his own weapon's redirection. He was staring at her with his amber eyes wide and his weapon hanging loose at his side. She lowered her arm slowly. The arena was silent. The same silence as before, but deeper now, bigger. It was not the silence of a crowd that had run out of things to say. It was the silence of thousands of beings who had just watched something their minds could not immediately file away. They had seen that weapon used before. They knew what it did. They had watched it be fired directly at this small, soft, unarmored creature from a world no one had heard of, and they had seen her catch it with her hand and push it into the ground. The silence stretched. She looked up at the warden's box. He was standing now. She had not expected that. He was standing and he was very still and his eyes were on her, and the expression on his face was not confusion anymore. It was not amusement. It was not the look of someone watching a stray animal. It was something she recognized even across a distance, even on a face that was not human. It was the beginning of fear. She looked away from him first, which she did on purpose, because she wanted him to understand that looking away from him was a choice she was making freely. She turned and walked back toward the tunnel. Behind her, the silence of the arena held for a long time. It held long enough that people in the seats would remember it later, long enough that when they told others about what they had seen, they would always mention the silence first, before they mentioned anything else. Because the silence was the part that had frightened them most. The footage was everywhere by the next morning. She did not know this at first. She had no access to the station's communication networks, no screen in her cell, no way of knowing what was happening beyond her four walls. But she could feel it. The station had a pulse to it, a rhythm made of footsteps and voices and the low hum of machines, and that pulse was running faster than it ever had before. Something had broken loose out there and it was spreading. The guards outside her door changed every 2 hours instead of 4. There were always 2 of them now, never one. They did not look through the window anymore, not even quickly, not even by accident. She noted all of it and kept her routine. On the second day after the arena, the food stopped coming. Not for long. About 6 hours passed with nothing through the slot, and then a different kind of meal arrived, better quality, more of it, served in a container that was clearly not standard issue. Someone had made a decision about how she was being treated, and it had gone upward. She ate it all and said nothing. On the third day, the warden came. He did not come with scientists or guards. He came alone, which told her more than anything else had. He stood at the cell door for a moment before the lock disengaged, and when he stepped inside he brought a small device with him, flat and rectangular, that he set on the floor between them and activated with a tap. A faint blue light rose from it, and then a voice came out, synthetic and slightly flat, speaking in her language. It was a translator, a rough one. She could tell immediately from the way it flattened certain words and paused in the wrong places, but it was functional. He said through the device that his name was Overseer Rakoth. She said her name was Sira Voss. He looked at her for a long moment after that. Then he asked her what she was. She told him she was human. She told him humans came from a single planet, third from their star, in a system far from Vathkari space. She told him they had been reaching into space for only a short time by galactic standards, that they were young in the way civilizations were young, still learning, still building. He listened to all of this, and then asked how many of her kind existed. She told him, 8 billion roughly, all on one world. The silence that followed that number was a different kind of silence than the arena had produced. It was quieter and more personal and in some ways more interesting. She watched his face and saw the math happening behind his eyes. 8 billion, all of them potentially like her. The thought was doing something to him, and he was trying not to let it show, and he was not entirely succeeding. He left shortly after without asking anything else. She sat with that for a while after he was gone. She had told him the truth because the truth was more useful to her than a lie. A lie would have been easy to check and would have cost her credibility. The truth, in this case, was already frightening enough on its own. She did not need to exaggerate anything. She just needed to let the numbers sit with him. 8 billion humans. Let him think about that. 2 days later, a different visitor came. He arrived at her cell during the quietest part of the night cycle, when the corridor outside was nearly empty. He was a Vathkari, but not one she had seen before. He was smaller than most, which still made him over 6 feet, and he wore plain work clothing rather than armor or a scientist's kit. His eyes had a careful quality, the look of someone who was used to watching a room while pretending not to. He came alone, and he came without the translator device, which told her he had prepared for this. He spoke to her in her own language. It was not perfect. The accent was heavy, and some of the words were put together in ways that needed a moment to parse, but it was real and it was clear and it was enough. He had learned it from recordings, he told her. He had been studying human communications for several years. He had been waiting for a moment like this one. His name was Yikath. He was a record keeper in the arena facility, a low-rank job that nobody important paid attention to, which was exactly why he had taken it. For years he had been collecting documentation. Files, images, records of prisoners who had come through the facility, records of what had been done to them, records of how the Dominion treated the species it conquered and absorbed and used. He had built an archive that told a story the High Council did not want told. He needed a way to tell it. He looked at her steadily when he said this, and she looked back at him the same way, and neither of them spoke for a moment. Then she asked him what he wanted from her. He told her plainly. The footage of her in the arena had spread across every communication channel the station had access to. It had jumped from there to outside networks, moving faster than the Dominion's content control teams could manage. People were watching it, not just Vathkari, other species, conquered peoples who had been told for generations that the Dominion was unstoppable, that resistance was impossible, that nothing could stand against Vathkari power. They were watching a small human woman catch a gravity lash with her bare hand and push it into the ground. He said the word she had become on those networks was not a name, it was a symbol. She was quiet for a moment after he said that. Then she asked him a question. She asked how many prisoners were currently being held in this facility. He told her. It was not a small number. It covered multiple species, beings taken from worlds the Dominion had rolled over in its expansion, kept here for use in the arena or for labor or for study. Some had been here for years. She was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet this time. He could see something moving behind her eyes, a calculation running, pieces being put together. She asked about the armory. Yikath blinked. He had come here expecting to propose a deal. An escape route for her, his archive sent out through her, both of them gone before the Dominion could close the channels. A clean trade, a way out. He had not expected her to ask about the armory. He told her he could find out. He asked her why. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said something that he would remember for the rest of his life. In the plain, flat way, she said most things, like it was obvious, like anyone would have arrived at the same place. She said she was not going to leave without the others. He stared at her. She asked him again about the armory, and this time she also asked about guard rotation schedules, facility maps, the docking level, and what kind of ships were currently berthed at the station. Yikath had come to this cell with a plan. It had been a careful, measured, realistic plan built over years of patient observation. He had come here to ask for help, not to be folded into something much larger than he had imagined. But he looked at this human woman sitting in a cold cell with a burned hand and bruised ribs and steady eyes, and he thought about the archive he had been carrying alone for years, and he thought about the prisoners in the lower levels, and he thought about the footage that was already spreading across the galaxy like fire on dry ground. He told her he would find out about the armory. She nodded once like that settled it. He left the cell feeling like he had arrived to offer someone a raft and somehow agreed to help build a ship instead. He was not entirely sure when that had happened. He was not entirely sure it mattered. Back in the cell, Sierra stretched her burned hand open and closed, testing the tightness of the healing skin. It hurt. That was fine. She had work to do. It began quietly, the way the most important things always do. Yikath came back 3 more times over the next 4 days. Each visit was short and careful. He brought her what she had asked for, piece by piece, in his memory because writing it down was too dangerous. Guard rotation schedules, a rough layout of the facility's lower 3 levels, the location of the armory relative to the main detention block, the number of ships currently docked and which berths they were in. He delivered each piece like someone passing a fragile thing across a narrow bridge, quickly and without dropping it. She listened to all of it once and did not ask him to repeat any of it. He had started to understand that about her. She did not need things repeated. On the 5th day, she told him the plan. She laid it out in clear, simple steps, the same way she would have briefed a fire team back home, direct and without extra words. He listened and his expression moved through several stages, starting at careful attention, moving through something close to alarm, and settling at last into a focused and slightly stunned acceptance. It was not a small plan. It required him to access 3 separate restricted systems using credentials he had been quietly collecting for 2 years and had never intended to use all at once. It required precise timing. It required her to do several things that he would have said were not physically possible, except that he had now watched her do physically impossible things twice in front of thousands of witnesses. So he had adjusted his sense of what the word possible meant when applied to her. She told him the most important part last. Before anything else happened, before a single door opened or a single alarm tripped, Yikath needed to get his archive out. All of it. Every file, every record, every piece of documentation he had built over years of careful and dangerous work. It needed to go out across every open channel available, every frequency, every network the station had access to, pointed outward in all directions at once. He asked her why that had to come first. She told him that everything else they were about to do would make noise, loud noise, the kind of noise the Dominion would want to explain away or bury or simply deny. If the archive went out first before the noise started, it would already be out there, already spreading, already in the hands of people and species and organizations that the Dominion could not reach in time. The noise would become evidence. The escape would become a story, and the story, she told him, was the part that would last. He was quiet for a moment after that. Then he said he understood. She told him to be ready at the 3rd hour of the night cycle, 2 days from then. He nodded and left. She spent the next 2 days the same way she had spent every other day, pull-ups, push-ups, eating everything they gave her, sleeping deeply. Her burned hand had healed faster than it had any right to, the skin still tight and shiny at the palm but fully functional. Her ribs had settled. She felt good. She felt ready. On the night, Yikath did his part first. He sat in the small records office where he had worked for 3 years and he opened every channel the station had, and he sent the archive out into the dark in all directions. A long and detailed and carefully organized account of everything the Vathkari Dominion had done in the name of expansion and order and progress. Names, dates, species, numbers. He attached the arena footage to the top of it because he understood now, as she had understood before him, that people needed to see something they could believe before they would believe everything else. It took 4 minutes to send. Then he walked to the detention block and did the second thing she had asked him to do. The power to the cell locks on the lower 3 levels dropped for exactly 40 seconds. That was all the time the override gave him before the backup systems caught it. 40 seconds. It was enough. Sierra was through her door in 3 seconds. She had been standing at it waiting, her weight already forward, her hands already knowing what to do with the guard on the other side before the guard had finished processing the fact that the door had opened. She moved down the corridor fast and quiet, and with a clarity of purpose that left no room for hesitation. She hit the armory first. It was where Yikath had told her it would be. The door was already unlocked as part of the same power drop. She took what was useful and what she could carry and what she understood well enough to use without shooting herself, and she moved on. The lower detention levels were chaos in the best possible way. 40 seconds of open doors had been enough for beings who had been waiting for any chance at all. They poured out into the corridors, dozens of them, from a dozen different species, some of them weak from long confinement, some of them in better shape than expected, all of them understanding immediately and without needing to be told that this was the moment and it would not come again. Sierra moved through them like a current. She did not speak most of their languages. She did not need to. Direction was universal. She pointed and moved and they followed, because she moved like someone who knew exactly where she was going, and people in crisis will follow that every single time. Yikath met them at the junction to the docking level. He had a look on his face that was somewhere between terrified and more alive than he had ever been. He led them the rest of the way because he knew the exact route, and she needed him for that part. The docking level erupted. There was no clean word for what happened there. It was loud and fast and very physical, and when it was over, the prisoners were on 4 separate ships, and the ships were moving away from the station in 4 different directions, and the Dominion's response fleet was already launching, but already too late, and already splitting its attention across too many targets, moving too fast in too many directions. Sierra was on the smallest of the 4 ships. Yikath was with her. So were 11 others, a mix of species she could not have named 2 weeks ago. She went to the communications panel and sat down and found the type beam frequency she had been keeping in her memory since the day she graduated from basic training, the one that every Marine memorized and never forgot, the emergency contact frequency for United Earth Command. She input her authentication code. She recorded a short message. She kept it simple, the way she kept everything, because simple was clear and clear was what mattered. She said that she was Corporal Sierra Voss, United Earth Marine Corps, service number attached to this transmission. She said that contact had been made with a spacefaring civilization called the Vathkari Dominion, and that the nature of that contact had been hostile. She said that the situation had developed significantly, and that she was attaching a full briefing file to the transmission. She said that Earth was no longer unknown to the wider galaxy, and that the wider galaxy was very large and very complicated and had been waiting for something to change. Then she said one last thing. She said, "Come prepared, but come talking first." She sent it. Then she sat back in the chair and looked out through the forward screen at the stars. There were so many of them. There had always been so many of them, but she had never looked at them from this side before, from out here in the deep, with the full weight of what they contained pressing in from all directions. She was not afraid of it. Yikath appeared at the entrance to the communications room. He stood there for a moment, watching her look at the stars, and then he asked her what happened now. She told him now they waited to see who came. He asked if she thought it would work. The archive, the footage, the transmission, all of it. She thought about it honestly, because she respected him enough to think rather than just reassure. Then she said she thought the Dominion had made a mistake that powerful things often made. It had looked at something small and unfamiliar and decided the size was all the information it needed. It had not asked what the small thing was made of. It had not asked what the small thing had survived before it arrived here. It had not asked how many more of the small thing existed or what they were capable of when someone gave them a reason. She said powerful things tended to regret that kind of mistake. Yikath was quiet for a moment. Then he said he believed her. 3 weeks later, at a neutral station at the edge of contested space, a meeting was called. It was attended by representatives of 6 different species, 3 of them former subjects of the Dominion who had seen the archive and recognized their own histories in it. It was attended by 2 Vathkari who had broken with the High Council, Yikath among them. It was attended by a single United Earth vessel, newly arrived, moving carefully and respectfully through space it had never entered before. And it was attended by Sierra Voss, who sat at the head of the table in plain clothing with no rank on display, and her scarred hand resting flat on the surface in front of her. Across the table, the Dominion envoy sat rigid in his seat. He had seen the footage. Everyone had seen the footage by now. His eyes kept moving to her right hand, the one that had done the thing that no one could stop talking about, and every time they moved there he pulled them back, because he did not want her to see him looking. She had already seen him looking. She let the room settle into stillness. She looked at the envoy and she waited, and the waiting itself was a message, clear and simple, and delivered without a single word. When he finally spoke, he chose his first words very, very carefully. She listened. Outside the station's wide windows, the stars were the same as they had always been. Countless and cold and full of things humanity was only beginning to understand. But the door was open now, and Sira Voss had kicked it open with her bare hands.